So I'm just using a hammer and a very solid screwdriver with its top missing, and I'm just going to do this off camera because I've got to hold this between my knees. Back shortly. So all that was needed was just a couple of sharp light taps while I had some tension torque on the screwdriver, and that was enough just to break those screws loose. Here's one of them, and its mate here may or may not fall out for us, it will. And the heads of those screws that you can see, that's pretty much unmarked. You wouldn't know anybody done anything awful to it with hammers and screwdrivers. Okay, so now we can lift these levers off. I'll lift them out one by one. I'll take the front lever out. Of course, as soon as I disturb these, everything flies up out of place. I'm going to release this lever first, I think. Oh yes, someone's done awful things to that. There's a lock screw in here which holds this post in position. Let's see if the lock screw will come loose. Now one of the springs has come out of position. There are 3 levers, 3 springs. This was the spring from the middle lever. It's fairly heavy. I don't want to get these mixed up. Back to getting this control out, there's a lock screw here which locks the position of that. I need to get that screw loose, and then the adjustment screw will turn. Oh, that's reluctant too. I'll put a drop of naphtha on there. I know someone's been playing with those because the adjustment screw is out. I'll be back with another screwdriver. Yeah, that's all that was needed. Now this adjustment screw here, see if it'll turn. No, it's locked. Okay, well that screw was locked. Basically it had been wound out all the way, effectively jamming it. It's still stiff, but the lock screw's backed up out of the way, so that's not affecting it. And I got that loose again with the hammer and a heavy screwdriver. See if I can get this thing to unscrew. Basically I'm screwing it into the camera. Okay, that's coming up nicely there. I'm going to remove this baffle, because 2 screws hold that baffle in position, and our bracket here is now coming up against that baffle. Here's our bracket. Oh, that's lifting off nicely. Now, I think you can see the bend in that lever. That needs to be straightened. Okay, so now we can lift off the front lever and its return spring. The springs are unlikely to be identical. They may be, but they're probably not going to be, so keep them in their positions. We lift out the second lever. It's this one. lift out the third lever. The third lever operates our capping plate. It's this one here. And there's our third spring. I'm looking at the springs I've got out here now. The front, the middle, and the rear. These two are quite similar. This one here looks a bit different. The one at the front's different. The other two look the same. Keep that in mind. This piece. This was the bracket that held everything in place. It's got a return spring on here, which I'm going to remove before I lose it. And this lever is bent. You can see that that lever is bent right out of shape. That should be in a straight line. It's bent so much I'm not even sure it would stay in place. It'll straighten without breaking, to tell the truth. But that brings our body down to this point. We've got the capping plate and the mirror in it, and their return springs, and not a hell of a lot else. Now I suggest that you do not remove these from the body without good reason, because it's an awful lot of fun getting those springs back in position, and there's not a lot to be gained by it. Okay, so we've got a camera body here which is stripped down pretty much as close to completely stripped down as you're ever likely to need to go. And all this stuff will need to be cleaned, ready for reassembly. So I'm just going to sort out these bits. Some of the pieces, like the body, will be cleaned by hand. I'll be scraping all this rubbish off, cleaning it with naphtha and cotton buds, and blowing away any rubbish until we've got nice clean components. A lot of the mechanical components will be going through the ultrasonic cleaner, and I do that in 2 stages. I do it once in a wax and grease remover, something that's made for painters to wipe down surfaces prior to painting, and that gets rid of all the contaminants and the thick grease and rubbish. And then after that it goes through a hot domestic detergent, a ammonia based detergent, and that cleans up all the rest of the residue and leaves me with parts that are nice and clean. And after that I just rinse them under hot water, dry them carefully with a hairdryer, and they're as good as gold. So I've got to separate out all the springs because they can't go through the cleaner. That would be crazy. They end up getting lost. But tiny things like springs, because they've got no mass to speak of, as soon as you get onto them with a hairdryer, they tend to blow away. So I'll sort out all my springs, put them to one side. And I've got a few springs with this camera. And these mechanical components, as I say, they are going straight into the degreaser. Or these. Yep, I'll do that. Anything with paint on it, like that knob from the Focus, don't put that through the ultrasonic. It'll strip the paint out and then you're going to have to put it back. Well, here's the body all cleaned and ready to do something with it. As you can see, everything's stripped out of here and it's just ready to put things back. So, putting back the control rods down here is a bit entertaining. And we've got 3 springs, 2 of them in this camera were the same. The one in the middle was different. Now I'm going to start by putting the control rod in the back in place. The control rod in the back is this one, this roller and that spring on it. I'm going to take some molybdenum paste, but graphite grease or even dry graphite would do as well. I'm giving this a very light wipe on the edges, front and back, and through the hole in the centre where it runs over the pin, and I'll put this in place. It's got to go behind this tab here at the moment. It's sticking out, getting caught on the side. That's better. I'll pull that tab back up and that will hold my capping plate down, this tab here. So that's sitting in place over its stud there. This plate, it goes in this way. This single slot here runs over that rod that we've just put in. So I'll hook it over there, slide it up to line up the holes. Now there are two holes. If this camera would hurry up and focus, you could see them. I need to line those holes up. I'm looking down from the top here and I can see, just about see where the screw needs to go. Get one of the two screws in position. That just picked up. Check that that's the case. Check that the arm moves smoothly. It does. And pop the other screw in place. Now I'll just run those screws up, but don't tighten them. I'm going to back them off about 1.5 turns. Half, 1, half. Half, 1, half. Now I can get the next rod in place. Right, so take the next spring, which was the odd spring in this case, put that on its post. This is the rod we want. I'll take some molybdenum paste, give that a wipe, both sides, both edges, and through the hole. Flick it in at the top, pass it down the side here because we've got a gap because I've left that plate loose, and just fit it into place. Our third spring, the same as the first spring we put in, goes there. Take some molybdenum paste or whatever lubricant you're using, and it can be dry graphite from a soft graphite pencil. Put this in position, swing that in at the top, put it over its post like that. Hold that in position from the side, and I'll just run those screws up slightly and check that those pieces all move, and they seem to. So I'll tighten those screws up a bit more. And our 3 control rods are all in place, sprung loaded and working. So that went quite smoothly. Now that I've got that done, I will tighten those screws and won't have cause to go back in there again. So the next thing to put in place is this catch. This catch holds our mirror down in position. It screws in here in the body, and the thread on this one was not in particularly good order. but I was able to get it out and use a replacement from one of my parts cameras. So I'll get this started. I just want to get that started and no more. I need to be able to swing this to one side so that I can connect it up with the pin on this arm. There we go, it's done. And you can see how that catch works. I'll just run that down a bit further. It's not going to be at the bottom, it's probably going to be somewhere like that. Now we have our control rods in place and the catch. We bring this down, I hold this down slightly, you'll see it holds the mirror there. And this catch, the position of this catch is used to adjust the position of the mirror, to adjust the focus of the image in the finder. Alright, that's all looking pretty good. There's a little grub screw here, a lock screw, which I'll just snug up but no more. That'll take any wobble out of this post. So that's all good. Now our mirror for the capping plate. Our capping plate spring rather goes in here. And on this camera it was this particular spring, drops in that hole. Now I've got a shortened base plate here, which I'm going to use, but you can put the whole base plate over this, or you can indeed just put a piece of sticky tape over that spring to keep it in position. I'll just pop a single screw in here to hold this in place. And that spring acts on this little tab here. This spring loaded makes this catch spring loaded. That's the catch that holds the capping plate down. When the mirror's in the down position, the shutter's cocked, it frees up this arm here, which has another catch on it, which slides over the capping plate at that point. And when the shutter's released, the mirror starts to come up, the capping plate is released by the catch on this side, but it's trapped by the catch on that side until such stage as the mirror rolls up far enough that it releases that and allows the capping plate to fly up and continue its motion. Alright, that part went quite smoothly. If you do things in the right order, there's a minimum amount of fuss there, but if you try and fight with it, if you try to get the 3 pieces in place and you're trying to get the screws in after you've got the 3 rods in place, I can tell you it's a nightmare. That went smoothly. That's the way I recommend you do it. Right, all the work's there in place. I'm going to put the door back on the back of the camera now. So 3 screws from the end. working sideways here so you can see what I'm doing. Normally I just stand the camera up on its end. Okay, so I'll just tighten those 3 screws up. Now the back's on the camera, and the important thing about having the back on the camera is it means we're not likely to damage the capping plate by accidentally getting your thumb on it while you're handling the camera. Alright, I think just about start putting the film advance mechanism back in this body. Alright, before I put the film advance stuff back in, I'll just put the tripod socket and so forth in the body, I think. So this little piece goes in first. Here's our tripod socket, 3 screws, once the 3 screws are all in position, tighten them up. That's our tripod socket. Now I'll put the rewind in place, I think. Now I've got some synthetic grease here. The stuff I use is this stuff, Inox MX6. But plenty of other things you could use. I'll just put some on the inside piece here of our rewind. There's a little tab on this rewind. Must line up with the notch inside this piece here. Okay, you can see it pushes all the way through, that's good. I'll apply some synthetic grease to the inside of this bush. There's a spring in this bush which keeps the rewind in place. Pop that on there. That's fine. Let's get this on the camera body. Two screws. And the reason I'm putting these pieces on the camera first is that it's helpful to have the tripod socket back in place, because otherwise every time you bang your camera on the table you hit the back release and the back flies open, which gets tiring. Okay, so that's in place. Now I'll see about the film advance stuff. I'll start by putting the lock lever and release lever in place. First I'll just remove this base plate that I'd put on to keep that screw and the spring in place. I'll take that spring and carefully put it to one side. Okay, so this is the lock lever that locks the film advance when the frame counter reaches frame number 1. So I'll run some molybdenum paste through these 3 spots at the base and these 2 spots at the top where these shafts are going to come through. The lock lever drops in there, passes right up through the top of the camera to here. It has a return spring. There are 2 springs that look much the same. The light spring goes on the lock lever. The heavy spring goes on the release lever. So I'm supporting that with my finger from underneath, compressing the spring with my thumb, and I'll take the little clip if I can pick it up, start it in the groove and press it home. Why is it not moving? That's better. And that's our lock lever in place. The release lever has a spring on the end. Here is the spring, and it has to go on that, around that boss. So I'll hook the little hooked end of it underneath the little tab here, and I've got to pull the loop over the top of that boss. Like that. That gets fed up from the base of the camera through this hole in the corner. Be very careful of that spring, you don't want to damage it. So be careful how it sits. I'm supporting that with my finger from underneath. And now I'll put its spring and screw in place. Just run that screw down a bit, check the action, it's returning nicely. See about the film advance shaft. I'm going to take some synthetic grease, pull the bush back up, anoint the shaft with the grease, work it underneath the bush, check that it's looking good. Apply some more to the spring. That'll just work its way in. That should be good. Okay, so to get this in place, I'm going to open the back of the camera, take our spool and the bush. The bush goes into the round hole in the spool, not the one with the slot. Because the camera's upside down, it's towards us. I'll just run some grease around that bush at the bottom. Drop this into position. Pull that spring back out of the way, lift that lock lever up, and our neutral position would normally be here. But with the reflexes you want an extra third of a turn of tension on that advance, otherwise the advance lever doesn't return to its rest position easily. So we're actually going to want to have this around here somewhere. Pull that back out the way. I've lined up the screw holes there and put the 3 screws through. Normally with the retinas you have a turn of tension on that spring. With the reflexes, or indeed with the 3S, 1 1/3 turns is the appropriate amount of tension to have on there. You sometimes find cameras where the film advance has been stiff, the lever's been reluctant to return to its rest position, and the cause is that the mechanism is jammed up with dried up old grease, dust and dirt, and some bright spark decides that winding a bit more tension on that spring would be a wonderful thing to do, and they end up damaging stuff. If you wind the spring up too much, you'll end up with things jamming up. Okay, so I've got that sitting in the neutral position at the moment. You saw I just turned it a third of a turn, so these two things dropped into place. I would give that one full turn from there of tension when I put it all together. However, we've got to put the stuff on the top of that shaft first. Is there anything else we can do while we're here? We could put the... No, we'll just do the top first. You can see that? Yeah, that looks okay. I'll turn you around a bit so you can see it all a bit clearer. Okay, so the clutch needs to drop in place next. The clutch is 3 pieces, of course. So I'll just put them there so you can see the pieces. I'm going to lubricate that with... I've got some molybdenum based grease which is very good for that, but you can easily use this. This stuff will work. This synthetic grease will work. If I've got graphite grease, I frequently use graphite grease to do this job. This is what gives us our controlled slippage so that you don't rip the sprockets, the holes out of your film when you're advancing the film. I'll just get the appropriate tool and we'll get this clutch assembled. This is what I'll be using. So we want the centre of the clutch, and the spring sits on there. The little tab of the spring drops into that slot, and we want to compress this spring, and I find that using this tool, hooking it over the top and then rotating that with my fingers pulls that spring into place, and it's all held there. Now I can slide this over the top and it's assembled. The clutch will move smoothly in one direction, not so smoothly in the other. Fortunately, the smooth direction is the correct direction. You can't muck that up. Let's pop this in place, rotate that till it drops into the slots in the top of the take-up spool. Then we have the bush for the film advance. This has been thoroughly cleaned, and as a result there's no lubrication in here at all. So I'm just going to put a blob of grease on there, push on it with my thumb, and the hydraulic pressure will just push that into the piece there. I'll give that a wipe around the inside. This sits on over the top. If we turn the film spool, that should rotate, and allow that. Basically we're lining up this gear set here with the splines on that clutch. Okay, so that's sitting there nicely. What have we got here? We've got two things. We've got a screw that goes at the back there. Let's do that up lightly. Then we have another one at the front. Now we've got a little standoff here, a little bush. It's got a countersink on one side. Make sure the countersink is down, not up. Otherwise the mechanism won't work. We've got a tiny little pawl here and a return spring for it. Now let's see if I can get these things in correctly. Where's my spring? Okay, here's our pawl. Here's the screw that holds it in place, the shoulder screw. I'll put a touch of grease on that. get that started. Okay, now the spring that goes on there. This is the spring. Get that hooked into place. So you can see that the ball is spring loaded, it pushes towards the centre. The gear on the top here, I'll run a little bit of synthetic grease under that and through the centre and rotate that into position. It should push the ball out of the way and you can see the action there. Nip these two screws up now. We may have to loosen those off later when we slide in the shaft for the sprocket, but at the moment that can stay done up. So on top of here is a leaf spring, and I'll just apply a little bit of synthetic grease to that, mostly to ensure it doesn't corrode more than anything else. This piece goes over the top. This piece drops in place. There's a washer here. This one's a bit ugly, but I don't think that'll cause us any problems. The gear just sits on the shaft like that. Now this screw was damaged. I'm going to find another one. Okay, I've got a good one here from my parts bins. Run that screw down. We'll tighten that up shortly, but that's all in place. Yet that's not rattling loose, and that screw is nice and flat through the centre. This is the one that came out of the camera, and you can possibly see it's got an indentation in the centre. That's where it's effectively been torn to bits. The sides of it are pulled right up out of shape. It's been over tightened, or it was misassembled and then tightened up, which caused that stress to happen. Okay, let's turn the camera back over. I want to get the latch for the rewind in place. There's the lever. I'll take a little bit of molybdenum paste, but you could get away with using grease. So I'm just going to put some on the tip. I usually give it a wipe through the centre for good measure. Slide this in underneath here. That's better. Here's its return spring. Now, normally just sit it in there like that, and then we'll hook it into place once the screw is in place. The screw's a shoulder screw. There are two shoulders on the screw, one that the spring can move around on, and one that the lever will pivot on. So that when the screw is down tight, the arm can still move freely. Now the end of the spring here needs to be lifted up and hooked behind the end of that arm. Let's see if I can do it. There's a pair of tweezers. That's it. Well, it's just popped out of place. That's better. So we need to put the sprocket shaft through and the sprocket next. Okay, well, our sprocket's going to go in here. The slot goes towards the top of the camera. Here's our shaft. I'll just put some synthetic grease on that. I can see what I've done with it. Here it is. Now I just put some towards the end, some up here. Usually I just put a little bit on the top there where the gear is. This slides in from the top, and if it won't slide in, it's because I need to slacken these screws off and just allow this to move back a little bit to give us the space we need. That's better. That shaft should pass all the way through our sprocket here. And it needs to enter the hole in the bottom of the casting. I'm just touch that with my tweezers to line it up. If I pull back this lever here, it allows that to pass through. Check that it's down and engaged. And now there's a screw needs to go in here. So I'll just rotate this until it brings the hole up where I can see it. And if I find the screw, we'll be in business. There it is. That screw doesn't look quite right to me. I wonder whether that's another odd piece on this camera. It is. Let me find an appropriate part. Okay. With the appropriate part, let's put the screw in place. Sometimes you'll find that the screw's reluctant to start. If it is, just rotate the shaft 180 degrees and come in from the other side. Oh, you didn't really see much of that. Sorry, just wandered off camera. The screw's in position. The rewind button needs to go on next. I have our rewind button, and I have a replacement spring because the spring that came with the camera wasn't right. So I put a little bit of grease through that spring, put the button on, put the washer on, and screw this into place. Okay, I'll just check that everything's seated correctly. It appears to be, and I'll get my pliers and tighten that up. Yes, the button moves, so that's all good. And it releases again. Alright, that's the major parts of the film advance in position there. At that stage I can put the cover on the bottom of the camera. Let's get that lever back in position. Its mate back in position. Now I want to wind a full turn of tension on this before I close this up. Let's get a pair of tweezers. I'll flip up the lock lever first, get it out of the way. Just tip it to one side. Hold my release lever out of the way and rotate this one full turn from where we were. Drop our lock lever back in place and it'll hold things there. Now a little return spring for our mirror, for our capping plate. That can go in there. I'll put my bottom cover, my temporary bottom cover in place. I use this because it helps me reassembling things later on in the piece, as you will see. And we can fit an advance lever. Well, we've got this damaged advance lever, which doesn't look all that flash. I've got one from my parts here, and I think I'll use that. I've got to put the rubber buffer in place first.